Last night I had the strangest dream in this bleak century. I dreamed that people the world around believed in chivalry. I dreamed I saw a kingly crown enshrined in laurel leaves, with grace and hope and purity attendant at his feet.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chivalry Yo Podcast. I am your host, Sir Roland DeGray, and today we have a great guest. Joining me on today's episode about courage is Duchess Madigan of Kandahar. She's a knight of the SCA and a member of the Order of the Pelican, and has been a big part of my SCA journey for many years. So I'm very excited to have her here today. And I'd like to say welcome, Duchess Madigan.
Thank you, Roland. I'm very glad to be here.
So, as we've kind of gone with these conversations, I just want to open it up and give you an opportunity to kind of give us a little bit of background about you, like what you'd like to share, and have people know kind of where you're coming from in terms of playing the SCA. So, if you could just give us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I think I went to the first event I had ever seen. I was like 15 or 13 or something like that. And so it was back in the 80s, and I got taken, and I met some people. It was, I think, a demo downtown in Santa Fe, and met Leaf and Craigon, and and I was already friends with Craigon, and so that was a little introduction, but I really didn't start playing until I moved to Alberon and started going to college. And my sister played, and so that was her social world. And we had been raised campers, and so that part really was the first part for me, is you get to go camping with all these people, and met some people, and then just jumped in with both feet. Like we just went all the time, and I was friends with a bunch of fighters. It wasn't really available to me to become a fighter at that time until a little bit later. And when Sir Richard Wolf would finally put me in his armor, like that opened and expanded me into this whole other SCA. And at the same time, I was very interested in Middle Eastern dance. I studied dance in college, so that was a natural lead in. And I was Mistress Bo Marishka's apprentice for art and dance and song. So those two kind of avenues, just kept me nonstop busy, sewing, fighting, dancing, whatever. And I played pretty heavily for 20 years straight, where most weekends were SCA weekends, traveler at home, lots of crafting, missing, Mother's Days and holidays with family, just because it was just what we did automatically, for sure. So, at some point I got very interested in making canvas tents as well. And that was a huge part of my SCA. And in and amongst all those things, as we started to really travel and go to Callantyre primarily, we went to Penzic a couple times too, that expanded my world enormously. So the SCA became, an outlet for making things enormously too. So then I became, so interested on my Monday through Friday as well. So really just loving the creativity of all of those things. Got me in, kept me around.
Very cool. Yeah, it's interesting being introduced to the SCA in sort of the same place at two different times in history. And I didn't get a firm introduction to a lot of those people till I moved to Alberon, because they had moved to Alberon. So like Craigon and Sarah and several others, these were all legends of Drigistan, but not knowing them personally till many years later, it was it's kind of like meeting heroes in the flesh, if you will.
Yeah, the stories. Well, it's funny for me because I live back in Kyrgyzstan now. I never played SCA in Kyrgyzstan, but I was raised in Santa Fe, and all of my friends, we all hung out so much together. Yeah. And my lifelong friends from that time in the SCA and outside, definitely, like, there was a cohesion, with Martino and Corton, and, like we stuck together, for sure. And the women that I danced with, most of them were from up here as well. So
Very cool. So we all have influences on our journeys. You've already mentioned one rather large one, Mistress Bomarishka, wonderful lady, very inspiring to me and many occasions throughout my career. Maybe speaking more to her and also others along your path, what are some people or some kind of big aha moments that you've had in your time in the SCA?
Well, when you come in, we used to call ourselves and call others too, you're a baby dancer. There, at that time, there was, dancers, and then there was Bomarishka of the Romanes, and she would come onto the dance floor and there would be a hush. And, the fighters who might have been cliche, not interested in art, would be, like, oh, there's Bo. Bo's going to dance. Let's watch Bo. So her reputation was so much larger than life. And she had such a huge effect on all of us young women because of her poise, right? Of her sure-footedness, pun intended, right? So she started to teach me everything from sure-footedness. How do you enter a dance floor at Lily Mountain and it's uneven? And if all eyes are on you, what the heck do you do about it? It with some grace. But then also, the first project we worked on together, Needham talked me into being in charge of water bearing at Estrella War for the whole barony. I didn't know anything about anything. And God bless, Bo came along and she's like, you need this wagon and you need to get the, and I didn't know where to fill up water. And somebody told me I couldn't get water from there. And Bo, again, with the sure-footedness, was like, no, they have to share their water. we're helping the fighters. So she was a huge influence on me, with sort of the skill with which she navigated all situations, dance, art, and other. Other very memorable people for me, Richard of Wolfwood, he came from Callantyre. He lived here. I just knew him. I mean, one of the things that happened to me is, because of some of our friends and things, we became friends with peers right away, high-ranking people. We would have a beer with somebody who was a duke. So I didn't spend very much time in the SCA of sort of being afraid to talk to peers or not knowing them. They were just my bros. And Richard was one of those, and he made everything seem like it was normal. And of course you would, make a period tent, but there really weren't very many period tents here, and make some foot gear and do whatever. But more than anything else, he was just like, this is a game we all play and we bring each other along. That's what we do. All are welcome. If we have coffee, we share it around. That's just what we do. So he showed me about the aspects of really being medieval in a way that I had never gotten from my social group. We wanted to belly dance. We wanted to fight. We wanted to camp. We wanted to have some partying. But he was the first one, and he never said, make the period choice. He was just like, here's how you make boots. You should do that, and tents and whatever, make the camp look nice.
So I don't mean to interrupt you, but yes, exactly that. I think that I think you can take two pretty strong positions in wanting to make anything more medieval within the society. One of them is proactive, and one of them is reactive. And the one where you're reactive has you standing in the middle of the camp wondering why things aren't the way you want them. And the other one says, go out and show and do, and people will follow your example.
That's right. That's right. And he introduced us to people who were like him. Like, now I look back and I get it, but at the time it just was a coincidence. I met Istvan. He came through. He's a Laurel from Callantyre. I don't know if he was a Laurel then. And I remember him again with nothing was taught overtly, not largesse, not hospitality. It was just like, they're coming through, who has room on the couch, right? So we're hanging out, and he's hand sewing this coat, Esteban, Master Esteban. And I remember looking at him, I was like 19, like, I have a sewing machine if you need one. Like, that's a lot of effort, right? And I remember him being like, no, I want to see how this works and how it feels to do it by hand, And I, I was young enough to think that's weird. And then fast forward to kind of, now so many, it's like, are your hands hand sewn or whatever, which was not the norm at that time. So really to be influenced in this like gentle lead by example kind of way, for other people. And the friends I had too were hugely formative, because watching how they then reacted to those same inputs, right? So, whether it was Martino or Rourke and Rothgar or whatever, in terms of how do you fight or what do you wear, so as a social group, what did we do,
Right.
as dancers following Beau's example? I mean, she really, was able to affect this incredibly gorgeous presentation without hypersexualizing it, nor responding to people who wanted to hypersexualize us.
Right.
But she never sat down and told us that. She just showed us,
Right. Very cool.
Yeah.
We've talked before on this program with other guests about sort of beautiful intermingling of the Outlands and Callantyr, and how the two kingdoms have affected each other over the years, and being friends, and how that has had its ups and downs in terms of people being able to participate. But I think last few years we've really bolstered up traffic between our two kingdoms, and it's been to our great benefit once again.
Yeah, I agree. And it was enormously formative for me to go there as a young person. We went every year, and I now understand that the demographic modern culture really affects the area of SCA and our values. And I mean, it was like a whole other world going there. And so we couldn't be otherwise than affected and bring it back in exchange with them. Yeah.
So thank you for that. I think we've got a good, solid understanding of where you're coming from. So let's kind of dive into our topic for today. I asked you to come on here and talk with us about courage. And we'd like to begin these with maybe kind of defining the term. When we say courage in the context of the SCA, what is it that we mean? Maybe broadly, and then maybe even more specific as we continue to kind of work out a definition here.
Yeah. So I think, I've thought about it. You asked me this, it hadn't been on my radar, and I thought, I don't know anything about courage. And then, so I started to really look at that question, what is courage? Where have I interfaced with that? And so, some classic definition of courage is, other words for it: bravery, pluck, valor, strength in the face of pain or grief. So being willing to say the unpopular truth, to stand up for what is right, even if the group is heading in another direction, willing to put yourself on the line. I think as a fighter, you think of what is courage. And that's brought me to actually quite a few laughs, just in thinking of my history of courage. So, I would say that the first thing about courage is it's very subjective, and courage is not doing any one thing, right? It's not running alone into a static line at a war. That is not the definition of courage. And for one fighter, that they might have to overcome their fear in order to do that, and therefore it becomes a courageous act. And for another fighter, they might really love the attention, the bravado. And so they're standing out there because they love that big energy, but it might not be scary to them at all.
Right.
So the first thing I think about courage is that one person's courage is not another's. And I think that is really relevant to our continued discussion, because because it is a perception, and it goes both ways, where people will think you're a very brave person, but that's not scary to you, what you did. And the other way, where people will think it's nothing. You spoke in court, of course, right? It took no courage to do that, but for some of us that is terrifying too. When I speak in court, I am shaking so much when I leave court, and I've spoken in court many times. It's still scary to me, so that's not an overly defined way to think about courage, but I do think that an important factor is that it is very subjective.
I think that's relevant. We've discovered a couple of times discussing and kind of picking apart the actual virtue of the day, that oftentimes what we're dealing with has a spectrum to it. There's no definite one way to make yourself absolutely that. It's not an on-off sort of situation. So I think that understanding that the courage is going to be different to different people is pretty much in line with what we've discussed in the past.
Right. And so we could say all virtue perhaps has that element, and so I also think when defining something, I'm like, well, what is it not? And that's an interesting part of courage. Is cowardice the opposite of courage? Is conformity the opposite of courage?
That's a good question.
I could make both arguments, because really, what is cowardice? It is fear of a thing. So what thing? Often, very frequently, it is fear of other people's perception of us.
Sure. Yeah.
Occasionally, it is very much, I am afraid, so again, thinking to my own experience, what is courage? Like for me, fighting was not courage, but then as I went all the way back to my very beginnings of fighting the first day ever in Richard's Armor in Alberon, people thought I was him. I got brutalized, to say the least. So it was courageous, I remember now, that I went back again.
Sure.
Second time, right? But fighting in general for me was not an act of courage from like physical pain. It sure was then. Thank you, Johan. But and that was the culture at that time, so it was fine. But I think that the perception of what others will think of us has to do a lot with cowardice.
Sure.
So trying to say what courage is not, I think is also relevant, because I think we know it when we're judging it.
Okay. Yeah.
In another person, you're like, I can't believe he just didn't do the right thing.
Right.
Is that a lack of courage to not do the right thing? And so if you were going to not do the right thing, why didn't you do the right thing? Maybe you didn't observe the right thing, right? I mean, which is subjective anyway. But so defending someone, someone slights a newcomer right in front of you. Why did you not intervene? Was it a lack of courage? And so there's a definition of courage too, of self-confidence, self-knowingness, to understand what you think is right and wrong.
Sure. And having enough wherewithal to know when action is called for. I think that some of the struggles that we have is that this isn't really the Middle Ages. This is a social club that all claims to enjoy aspects of the Middle Ages. So we play dress up, and that's fun. But at the end of the day, it's a social club. So not wanting to burn too much social capital,
right?
Because the cause that you may have been called to defend might be based on something that you're not aware of, something you're not familiar with. It can be difficult sometimes trying to determine, when is action necessary? When should I wait and be more prudent and take in all the information?
Yeah. Yeah, impulsivity and courage, I think, within the context of the SCA as a medieval, but also a social endeavor. I mean, that's, highly what it is. It is social. It's how we're interacting. It has so much to do with our own awareness, but then within the SCA, also our station, who's supposed to do that, right? A knight is supposed to defend ladies and those weaker than themselves, depending on the oath that you swear. Right. And so, it's like, when is that called for, and where does that interface with, the modern understanding more of feminism, et cetera, right? So there's so much complexity to what are we supposed to do? And then do we have the talent, practice, authority by our rank and station in order to do that, So one of the definitions I found that I liked is that the opposite of fear is curiosity, trust, courage, calmness in the face of the storm. And I think a lot of us would agree that those things, right, would make up courage, right? It's like the tents are all blowing down. Somebody has to do something about it. Somebody takes leadership. Somebody starts barking orders. We got to take them down, take the poles down from the inside. Don't rip the canvas, whatever, right? And there are some people who say, how did you know what to do? Well, that's experience. And there's some people who say, well, how did you take charge? And it's like, well, it didn't occur to me not to, but maybe that's part of my rank and privilege as well. It's hard to parse those out.
Sure. And I think that self-reflection can help individuals maybe realize when it's time to take on some of that, even if they've been awarded a rank. I know that I didn't really think about what it meant to be an armiger at all, really, until a little bit later. I'd had an AOA for a couple of years, and then realized that, I have a level of experience that others could draw on, and that compelled me to be a little bit more active in making sure that our newcomers, knew that I was a resource, if nothing else. And I think that that took a little bit of thinking about what I was doing, a little self-reflection piece. And I think that a lot of what we've discussed in this series is kind of boiled down to thinking about your own actions, and then good or bad, and then coming up with some lessons learned along the way.
I mean, I think self-reflection is a courageous act if you're being authentic. We'll see if this works. Nobody wants to be left out.
It's true.
But self-reflection is courage, right? And so to speak, you said so many things there I want to speak to. So one is, knowing that you have some wisdom, and like as an armiger in the SCA, right? So also some rank or understanding, experience, acknowledgement that maybe a little bit more than somebody else, right? So that takes a little getting used to. And what does that mean, right? I was just watching you and Bardoff talk about humility. And so navigating that, right? I'm not saying I'm all that, but acknowledging maybe I have something to share. When you first realize that you have enough to be hospitable to someone else, camp with me.
Yeah.
Come eat with me, follow my example. Even here, I'll show you how to, I'd be too afraid to talk to the king. Well, let me show you, right? So then you're sort of affecting that person's courage.
Yes.
Because of your support and connection. So I think that's relevant. I think where you come from is relevant, your family culture. Is it okay to jump in? Do you hold back? Are you afraid of things? Did you try things? Curiosity, I think, is a part of this. But the idea of self-reflection, I think, is a tremendously courageous act, because it opens the door for also finding fault with one's past and previous self. And certainly as I was looking at this.
Sorry, my phone rang.
That's all right. Certainly as I was like thinking about courage for myself, like, again, when you said that, I was like, what do I have to do with courage? I think for me personally, my journey with courage has been, the hard, cold reality of when I've done something not good, and then do I have the courage to own it, to show back up, to whatever.
I've definitely had those moments in my SCA and in mundane life in general. I think that owning up to your mistake is something that I personally have struggled with, but I have always found that once I've done it, no matter how hard it took to get there, it was ultimately a better choice. And I think that attitude is only cemented with my life experience. I don't know if it's necessarily an attitude that everybody develops, or when they develop it. I think it's like, everybody's life experience is different. So, but I think the quicker you come to understand that doing the right thing bears more fruit than doing the wrong thing, and
Yeah.
no matter how hard that may be, and I've definitely gotten to the point where it's like I'm almost having a conversation with myself and say, well, and the cowardice within that thing that's motivated by fear, that part of you that says, well, wouldn't it just be safer if we forget it never happened? Or
Right.
wouldn't it be safer if I just bent the truth a little bit and then nobody's feelings got hurt? Well, actually, no, that's garbage. Because ultimately, going back to my discussion with Earl Mortigan, that's you're basing your future actions on a lie.
Yeah.
And courage sometimes is about, I think, really confronting yourself and saying, hey, what is it you want to leave from this point forward? Do you want to base it on the truth, regardless of what that is, so it's strong? Or do you want to base it on a lie?
Sure.
So,
Yeah. And, to expound on that, I mean, I think, there's a part of my SCA experience that is so long, right? And so it spans also my personal and human development, right? Of what I thought was right and wrong, and my talents, and my fears, and those things. And part of courage is, over time, to have done seemingly the same thing, to play the SCA, but to really have the courage to look at it and go, is that the way you still want to be? Is the way that you were, so you say based on a lie. I hear that, and certainly that's relevant. And, for me, in my observation of self and others, it's more based on old habit or stuff, BS that, was relevant at the time,
Sure.
and arrived at, and honestly, most of it is a social construct. We don't do that. Yes, we do that, whatever. So there is courage to that part of it too, like you're saying, and in the face of that, either making amends or changing or making a public statement, whatever that is, showing up,
right.
more authenticity. I think being authentic is an act of courage, of when everybody is making a joke about something and you need to say, actually that, I don't think it's fun to joke about that, or whatever, right? To defend that. Because again, socially, over time, things shift. And
Sure.
so, like, how do you shift the very floor that you're standing on and saying, I used to do that, I don't do that now, and we need to talk about that,
Yeah.
allowing for each other to change as well.
Yes. And I think, being the social club that we are, I think there's got to be room for the mercy component
Yeah.
when dealing with anybody about anything. We haven't gotten to mercy yet on our on my program. It's actually saving that one for last. But I will speak to it in terms of courageous acting. The ability to be courageous can be made a little bit easier. The choice can be made a little bit easier, I think, if that person realizes they're in a community that supports them, even if they're going to make a mistake, that there's mercy there to be had, that if you take this chance, even if it blows up in your face, the community still got you. And I think that we as a society can do a better job, and in some cases we are. I think that there are many examples in the last year and a half since I've kind of taken on this new role as Baron, that I've seen mercy and compassion being extended to people that really deserve it. They went out on a limb, they did a courageous thing, and maybe it didn't fall right, and the community comes together and supports that person. I think the more that we can build that into whatever we're doing, being that gentle support that you were discussing earlier with some of those examples, not necessarily, using it as a pretext to maybe get insulted, or a pretext to maybe flaunt one's knowledge, but rather a call to, hey, let's just support. Let's be here for each other, and let's make it okay to grow, right?
Sure. And the SCA, I mean, one of the wonderful things the SCA does is promotes mentorship, sincere mentorship. I'll be your squire, I'll be your student, entering into that. What does that mean? And it really means we're going to allow someone else to give us input about our conduct and our productivity, whatever it might be, our art. And I mean, it's essential. It's a way to connect, right? If we're going to grow, we got to stay curious. And if you're going to stay curious, you're going to try new things. And when you try new things, some of them aren't going to work out, right? And so there is courage in that, right? I mean, the classic thing is, to talk about courage in terms of prowess or, fighting or whatever, right? But when someone says, no, I'm going to go and, start researching, some totally different thing, and I want to try that different persona or whatever, that there is some support and some feedback for that. And I agree with you, mercy is essential. It's like, if we lack kindness, then in my opinion, the whole thing just crumbles. And we've seen it happen when there was even a need for correction or input or whatever, but it was done without kindness and it wasn't supported socially. That person leaves the SCA, or there's hard feelings for 30 years, right? Because of disagreement, right? And I've certainly been on participated, been on both sides of that. And it feels terrible, right? So then, how does courage come into that? I mean, for one thing, being merciful is courageous, is that you are not going to get taken advantage of, that you have an infinite amount of kindness to share with other people, right? You're not going to use it all up. You're not going to be such a nice guy that people are going to take advantage of you. So there is some courage in consistently expressing mercy, I think.
Yes.
And promoting that, and sometimes it's standing up and saying, hey guys, you're not being very nice about this. This candidate made one mistake and now we're never going to knight him, we need to reset ourselves there.
Absolutely. And speaking to the mentorship aspect, I think that as adults in particular, I think those who grew up in the SCA might speak to this a little different, but if myself, for example, I became a squire at age 25. There are people that become squires at much later ages, or students, what have you. I think humbling yourself and saying, I'm ready for somebody else to tell me where I'm screwing up is courageous. Yeah. And I think that it takes courage to maintain that relationship, because sometimes I can't say that Thomas and I ever had this issue because we were pretty harmonious, but I've had squires where I've gotten in arguments with them about things, and words get heated, and perceptions get tested, and and being able to come back after something like that and say, all right, I've cooled my head. Let's talk about this again. Let's not go where we went the first time. I think that takes a lot of courage on both parties, in order to remind oneself, hey, we entered into this relationship with good faith, and these are our goals for one another.
Right.
We're here to support each other. Um, but you're still taking a risk, that it might happen again, or it might be worse, and so, um, shout out to everybody who's kept those, mentor relationships alive, even when they've been tough, because
Yeah.
that's a big part of it too.
Right. No, I agree. And I think you just defined a beautiful part of courage, right? Is to go back, as the mentor, right? To go back and reset yourself and redigest that and cool off and maybe explain or support or whatever, right? I mean, it is the most common thing that when we mess up, we could feel shame, and shame, right? If shame, anger, fear, all of those can be the darkest of emotions, leading to uncourageous acts. And so therefore the opposite is shining the light on that and being like, okay, why did I lose my temper? You
Right.
know? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's complicated, but every time we go back and do something that has proved difficult for us, there is courage in that act. And I think in the SCA, some of it is just so expected. When you're a new fighter, you get beaten up, you go back, you get beaten up, you go back, right? You learn some skills. And so it's just expected. But I think it's good to, acknowledge, and especially as we want to promote newcomers, to say, no, that's, entering arts and sciences, like, I mean, I don't know what it's like these days, but it used to be so terrifying. That was a huge act of courage. So really, like, looking at why is it scary, and then with mentorship and that kindness, supporting each other of doing that.
Absolutely. Courage and cowardice, are they really the antithesis of one another? We've kind of brushed on it a little bit already, talking about the two. Are they opposites? Or is one lacking? Is one the lack of the other? Like, what makes cowardice what it is?
Well, I mean, I think we have to define cowardice. Cowardice is having a task in front, or something that you want to achieve or be or do, and not doing it because, don't want to overanalyze this, but because of internal right struggle, fear. And I'm very curious about the idea that cowardice is not the antithesis, but that, fear of not conforming really is. So what is cowardice? It is not doing what you think you should or what is right. I mean, and when we're really talking about the virtues, what is not right? I did not defend that person because I was afraid because they were so high ranking that, I would look a fool or get, because I mean, there is not really in trouble in the SCA. There is not like SCA jail. I mean, you can do very bad things and they'll come after you, but
well, right. I mean, and what are we really talking about? And that's, I don't think anybody's confused about things like, well, there was an assault that occurred on a site. No, we call the police.
yes.
Nobody needs to make a judgment call as to whether or not they need to intervene in that situation. We just call the cops.
Right.
But yeah, so what we're really talking about are things that don't have a formal policing structure outside of maybe just what our social expectations are in the SCA, which unfortunately for all of us is not necessarily standard even within a small group, much less across the known world. I mean, people behave very differently, and have different standards of interaction throughout the society. So being able to nail that down can be a little difficult, and I think it does require some calibration if you move around.
Yeah. And, we can talk about it from the inner conflict place. If I'm the only one who knows I did a cowardly thing, right? There's the inner conflict of that. I didn't, I could argue that those are kind of the greatest lack of courage, right? The hardest struggles is I know I didn't do right. But what are the consequences? And most of our consequences are social. So within the context of this conversation, I could say that the opposite of courage is not doing what you think is right for fear of the judgment of others, and could that be partly a lack of mercy? Sure. Mundanely, I think I would define it a little differently, but within the context of the SCA, I think so much of it, because again, the consequences, I mean, I guess you could light a fire and it could get out of date, that would be terrible, right?
Sure.
But honestly, lighting the fire wouldn't have been an act of cowardice, right? It would have been carelessness. So yeah.
Interesting. I think that I think you're right. I think that you hit on maybe a good solid understanding of cowardice in the context of the SCA. I wonder, like, what are your feelings on how we tend to enforce some of these social norms, maybe to dissuade people from being cowardly or encourage courage, perhaps? What do you see as some of the things we do in the SCA to promote that desired sort of behavior?
To be more courageous.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think word fame, primarily, did you see what he did? Oh my gosh, did you watch how she did that or whatever? So I do think that we use word fame quite a bit to promote courage, for desired behaviors, on and off the field. I like to think that we don't shame.
So that was going to be my follow-up. What do you think about,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there in social context. Absolutely. Toughen up, man. I'm not going to wear any armor and I'm going to go out there and fight all those guys. You know what I mean? There's sort of, so bravado, I don't think bravado is the same as courage. But I think it is used some, and we used to encourage courage through pain induction, but I like to think that's not so much, I haven't seen it like that in many years, Yeah. So really, I think the focus, and I'll talk about on the field, is like, wow, I saw you took a hard shot there, and that guy's really an intimidating fight, and it's okay to take a minute and to process it or whatever, right? So showing some support and some mercy and those kind of things, and in that way promoting courage of a shared experience. I mean, I think, in my experience, that the way that courage was taught to me was through watching someone not be brave, but through them having a challenge and facing it. And the more transparent that person was about it, the more I learned about courage. So again, like, people speak in court. You think people who speak in court all the time are, that comes easily to them. But when someone tells you, oh my, that's really challenging for me, and I'm behind the tent rehearsing my lines, right? Somebody's observing that, and instead of going, wow, what a coward, they're hopefully seeing, wow, that's hard for them. And in the context of it being difficult, they're taking measures to continue on with their chosen goal. Yeah, so you see people overcoming their fear in a transparent way. And I do think SCA culture has shifted from saying, I'm never afraid of anything, there's little John Wayne cowboy stuff definitely back in the 80s, to, acknowledging that's hard for me. And now the social culture is for big, strong people to even admit to fear.
Sure.
And overcome it,
I think I've said it many times that just having conversations can help alleviate such things. There are scenarios that anybody could think up, and I've definitely done my share as a squire talking about those scenarios. I've done my best to do that with my squires, to say, what if this happens? How you handled that?
Right.
And I think that's a good part of training anybody on the path to chivalry is to, kind of get them to think outside the current situation to what is truly possible. Something that I didn't anticipate and happened to me like a month after I was elevated was I got called as the only knight in the building because it was early in the morning to deal with a mundane trespasser. And I mean, a lot of things went through my head in a very short amount of time. First of all, we were on campus at UNM, so that made it a little easier because clearly there are mundane authorities within an easy communications reach that could deal with any potential issue. So I'm sort of thankful that it happened at that time.
Yeah.
And not when because I know I've heard many tales of having to deal with such things out in the middle of nowhere in the SCA with our camping culture. But, there was like a brief second of like, where's all there are no other knights.
Right, where's the guys that stand behind me that help me with my courage?
Right. Yeah. And that can be I'm proud of that moment, not to brag about it, but just I think it was definitely a good moment to have.
Yeah.
It was sort of like
a teacher.
No.
Yeah.
It's you. Go deal with it, And I think that I think you can have many of those moments because that's just one scenario that could pop up that a knight would be expected to deal with. That is who they're going to come find is somebody with a white belt on to deal with that situation. But it surely isn't the only one. I mean, Alberon's had a storied history. We've had wildfires rage out of control at events and all kinds of weird stuff that people immediately turn to our order to take action. So I think that the more conversations you can have to kind of guide folks into understanding maybe the thought process.
Right.
Excuse me. I think that also helps with the overall culture. I think that piece as well, because if we are talking about what we expect as a group, if we're talking about what's appropriate and what maybe isn't appropriate, then there's less of a apprehension to act when it's time, I think. And I think it's also becomes very clear that it's okay to act, even if you're not duped so-and-so.
Right. That, because like you said, you're looking around like, where are the other guys that are going to help me make this decision or, at least confirm what I need to do. And, decision-making, I think, is the ultimate in courage. I mean, it's very rare that when someone has done something that we would agree is courageous, that the part that was hard was breaking the window or punching the guy or grabbing something, right? That's not the hard part. The hard part is deciding when and how to act. And so, yeah, your example brings up a couple things. So I think that courage in the face of a known and anticipated event is very different than courage in the face of unanticipated, unplanned, unprecedented events, right?
Correct.
And so, and I think, when you kind of make your list of like, how am I going to define this? What's the antithesis, et cetera? There become like these bubbles of both sides where I think we would all agree on. We might not be able to put a word on it, but we would all agree that was courageous. And in my memory, so many of those things have been somebody making a decision and taking leadership or action.
Sure.
In the of unanticipated, unexpected. So then it's like, how do we teach that, right? How do we teach, how do you think on your feet? And, I think it's, you teach the components of decision-making, of leadership, of awareness. A huge part of courage is awareness. You'll all be standing there and the tents are blowing down and half the people the next day are like, yeah, I didn't even think of that. I didn't, right? So their situational awareness is not only is that tent going to rip, which is a personal, personal affront to me, I think, any camper tripping. But also, like, the poles are going to shatter. They could hurt someone. So it's right. So at some point, somebody's seeing that part of it, right?
Yes.
Like, we're preventing further harm and destruction of property. So there's awareness. So I think we can teach our squires and our students and people, right, the components that you rely on when courage is called upon.
Yes.
You know, as necessary. And so I think those are teachable. What popped into my head when you were talking about being a new knight and those things is, you know, there's a part of thinking you know what you're getting into and then not knowing what you're getting into, whether it's through a leadership role or a privilege or bestowed peerage or whatever. And I think that there can be an element of courage when you ask somebody else for help.
Yes. Yes.
Right. I mean, so I became a squire in a very untraditional way. And there were many, many elements to becoming Zachariah's squire. But a big part for me was acknowledging I needed help. And I had been in a position of already being a peer, et cetera, where, you know, I was supposed to be a big kid and take care of myself. And there were things coming at me that I was really, they were unpleasant and I needed help with them. And so then to go find someone who had courage in that way and say, I lack courage in this. I need your support here.
Right.
Until I can learn whatever skills I need to get through that.
Yeah, and I think that just goes back to how we kind of articulated it earlier, that mentor-mentee relationship can really bear a lot of fruit, but it's not necessary easily to even realize that's what you need.
Yeah.
And there are people out there right now that maybe that is all they really need. They've been doing a lot of great stuff for many years and they just don't lack, or rather they lack a little bit of direction. And, you know, are they open to it? Have they even considered it? Or do they think that they're past that? I mean, there's any number of things that can interrupt that and maybe lead to doubting a move like seeking out a mentor of some sort. But I would say that, yeah, once you decide to make that commitment, very courageous. And then if you can maintain it to fruition, that within itself, depending on the path, can be very courageous indeed. Excuse me, sorry about that. So let's talk about courage as it applies to some folks on the path. Why is it that being courageous is important or relevant to knighthood? Why is it that if you're going to be a knight, is it necessary for you to have a measure of courage, or at least maybe a capacity to be courageous?
Well, I think, you know, we're seen as the protectors in the SCA. And so right there, you know, there's an element that people are going to come and ask you for help. And again, there's the anticipated help, carry my basket, right? There's sort of that cliche that that's what chivalry is going to be. Well, it gets a lot harder than carrying somebody's basket, you know? So, you know, being comfortable with being vulnerable, being asked things, you know, I can't tell you how many times, right? You go ask the new knight to herald a tournament and they're like, whoa, that's not part of being a knight, you know? And it's like, well, we don't have any heralds and this tournament's an hour late already. And so I'm telling you, service to the crown right now today means you're going to be a herald, you know?
Sure.
So I think that, you know, in teaching and in why is courage essential to being a member of the chivalry, you know, I've been in many philosophy discussions where, you know, one of the things that makes it different about being a member of the chivalry is that you can see it by what we wear on the outside, right? So you scan the field, you don't necessarily see who's a pelican or a laurel, but you do see who is a knight or a master at arms. And I think we're trained from our first SCA. If you get lost, if you don't know what to do, you can always ask a guy who has that belt on, who has that baldric on, right? I mean, I raised my kid, right? If you get lost, you find anybody who is a knight or master and you ask them how to get back to camp, right? Because it's the most readily visual, cue to who we have decided is responsible. And so therefore, if we have decided that as a culture and put white belts and baldricks on people, then we have to imbue the people that are going to wear them with the understanding that being vulnerable is okay, and doing that which is outside your comfort zone is expected.
Yeah.
Like being at UNM and somebody's trying to break in. It's like, I would never have written that down, that's something you got to do, but you got to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been in some like scary situations. When you brought up storms, it brought up memories, because anybody who's been to the lovely Lily's War has probably experienced a microburst on on the point there. But I've been in some scary weather situations where acting quickly was important, and following whoever stepped up to be the leader was important. And I think some of those solid examples stick out in the mind of where the mentality isn't necessarily, am I doing something I'm afraid to do, or am I taking action that I'm afraid to take? The mentality more is, well, there's a problem and the crown needs help, or the populace needs help.
Right.
I've got to act. I think that a lot of courageous action that I've witnessed has been just knights and masters and others having that sort of awareness that you spoke of earlier, and saying, okay, something needs to be done.
Right.
And it can be infectious. It can be, particularly in those crazy weather situations, because there definitely are those people that they see something like that going crazy. They see a big pavilion launch up into the air because there's this big gust of wind, and their reaction is to, retreat a little bit to maybe find somewhere that's safe. And then there's the people that are like, no, we got to go fix that.
That's it.
And I think it's definitely true that being in the order, I think, has helped me to refine when those cases are in my mind.
Sure.
Really, really think about, okay, when is it necessary for me to charge in there like, a bull in a china shop and make effective change immediately? And when is it more appropriate for me to say, let's watch the situation, let's just be aware? Or when is it like, well, this is obviously silly, don't pay attention to this?
Right. I'm not even. No, and I think that's valid. And I think that we find, there are people who run towards it, and there are people who run away from it. And there are some people who don't notice it, right? And I've had both experiences. I agree completely. It's infectious. I think that there is a culture, an SCA culture to it of helpfulness. Different kingdoms I've been to really see it differently, where the guys who do the hard physical work are more the squires, we anticipate that. And then I've been other places, you look at it, who's setting up the battlefield, it's all knights, doing that kind of labor, which is not the same as courage, but there is a culture to the doing, the going forward. Again, lay of the land, identifying that there is an issue. We can, the storm thing, absolutely. And, what I've seen in the storms is sometimes an evaporation of some people you thought maybe should have stepped up, but also, secondarily, you look over at who's holding the tent poles down, and you watch her and you watch him, and you think, wow, that person has some mettle to them that I had not had opportunity to see. And so, crisis also can bring in that, but I lost my train of thought, but I do think that culture, has to do with how we take over, and we have to have that struggle with our ego of, I don't want to be the loud guy bossing people if it's not necessary too, Yeah. But in terms of courage itself, we have to support each other when we make mistakes, going back to that mercy part too.
Yeah.
Right. And a merchant coming back and being pissed off, you took their tent down while they were gone from sight last night. Right. And you got not that that's ever once happened, but you got to say, man, your tent poles were going to hurt people.
Right.
Right. So there's, I think courage in standing up for what you believe is right is, real tricky, because every time you're sure you're right, you better be questioning yourself. I think, to get back to what we were talking about earlier too, I wanted to just highlight there is some sort of iconic value of what we want the chivalry to be. And that is why courage is part of that,
And I think that's ultimately what I was going to pull back around and yeah, make that same point, that like, I think it's necessary for people to see peers being the things that we want everybody to be.
Yeah.
I think that if peers get nothing else from their understanding of what a peer does, setting the example should be absolutely the thing that they get. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could say a peer should be able to do, but
Sure.
At the end of it all, if the person is just setting a good example,
Mhm.
then I don't think that they will fail in that regard. I think that the worst you could do is set a bad example.
Sure.
So,
and the courage in that is to set the example that you believe is right at the time, and be willing and vulnerable enough to revisit that if you need to, right? Is to be wrong.
Sure. And I think there are folks that deal with each other within the society from a very sort of distant, keeping a healthy distance from one another. They don't like to interact with one another, one way or the other. They're not agreeable. Yeah. And I think that sometimes I've definitely played the weird intermediary between groups like this. So it's weird. It's weird when you see both sides of it and you're like, you guys would probably get along if you just talk to one another, but that requires some courage. And sometimes we just don't want to go there, and maybe we have good reasons, but to break that silence between them, to address that issue would require courage that they're not willing to.
Yeah. I agree, whether it's old schisms or political norms, I think it was Duke Sirith on an interview was talking about, crossing the road was big. And I remember that, right? I was just younger than his generation SCA. And we were taught that one whole thing was totally right and valid, and then for us to come up and be like, no, I'm going to be friends with Belters,
right.
And it took courage, because we got criticized. We got harshly criticized for it from people that we considered to be our mentors. So it was like, and kind of always checking in that way of experiencing courage with some patience. And that I wanted to bring up that too, that I think an element of patience has to do with this as well, of okay, I think this is the right thing, but I'm going to come back and check in again with my peers, with people I respect, with mentors. And then I'm going to go again and see, is my argument, my conviction valid, to the best of my ability. And like you said, trying to set a good example. I mean, even that is kind of subjective, but I think we're setting a good example when we're demonstrating that we want input, that we're doing the best we can, that we are fallible, yeah, and that we know how to make amends when we screw up. That is courage,
Yeah, and I, being a little self-critical, I think that that our order could do a little bit more to kind of build up what you just spoke to there, which is this sort of this culture where it's okay. We all agree we were acting in good faith. Let's not let some of this stuff fester. Let's talk about it a little bit,
Right, to give each other the benefit of the doubt. You were doing the best you could with the information you had and the support you had at the time. So, but now, do we know better?
Yeah.
What's next? Yeah.
That can be tough. I won't sit here and pretend like hearing that sort of feedback can't be difficult for someone, because absolutely, I think that's why or how we get into situations where people don't talk for decades on end is facing up on whatever the situation was.
Yeah,
is hard. I go ahead.
What pops into my head is, as we continue to strive to define courage, one of the things I would say is the opposite of courage is gossip, and is
Sure.
assumption, right? So conversation had for no other anticipated positive outcome rather than to influence you or unburden myself, right?
Right.
And in a perfect world, none of us would have ever gossiped. I think all of us have gossiped, and some of that is a developmental phase, I think, when you're young or whatever. But I think when you come down to it, that is something that lacks courage, because it's maybe you have a legitimate concern, but then you need to address that legitimate concern face to face. And I feel like that's what you're speaking to, is that the more, and over time you see people who used to, be on opposite camps and now they're friends. And it's because of an open and honest dialogue, right?
Yeah.
And so there's courage to that.
Well, and then there have been folks that I've made amends with and used that precise method. It's just like, this is about to be awkward, and I don't know how this person's going to react, and I may look foolish by trying, and I've been pleasantly surprised, honestly. Sure. I think sometimes our reticence to disturb the social norm that was established, even if it's established under negative pretense, it's hard to overcome that. I think sometimes when we are looking to not want to be in conflict with someone anymore, whether there's actually been any real conflict in years, we get tempted by the status quo. Well, we haven't had to deal with this, nobody's fussed about it, so I'm just not going to ever put it to bed.
We'll just politely not say anything. Yeah.
Well, right. But there's danger in that. I think that there becomes this sort of little nugget of malice in your heart. Because if you can't put that to bed, then that person's going to do something later, whether it involves you or not, that you're going to then ascribe that little nugget of malice to, like, oh, well, I always knew that he was garbage or whatever, or she was, a liar, and
right. Well, and going back to setting an example, people are always watching us, right? And like, that's, I know Cecilia spoke to that a little bit, and I mean, I was in a position, so I was so young when the spotlight was on me, and so of course I made so many mistakes and, crazy decisions, I don't know, whatever 22-year-olds are thinking, but, and so to have the patience then to revisit some of that, to acknowledge what is, like you're saying, if you're holding on to some nugget, the courage to try to change it, but it takes all parties to want that shift to happen. So a big element is then having the courage, to stick with your mercy, and mercy with yourself as well. Yeah. Yeah. But they're always watching us, I guess, is what I wanted to highlight. So it's not just us holding on to that nugget. It's the people that we influence, because you think you're keeping it cool, but if you don't like somebody or something, people around you notice it.
Yes. And I think there's a lot of folks that don't even try to hide that aspect of their game a little bit. Wish that they would a little bit more in some cases. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of working with the exact person that you love to work with all the time. So it being a volunteer organization, which we declare many times as we speak about the the administrative aspects of this game. Coming into a situation with a crap attitude almost certainly breeds a negative interaction in my experience, because I've done it. I mean, I to sit here and act like I've never grumbled having to work with a person that I don't get along with. I mean, that certainly has happened in the SCA. I find if I kind of reset my mental state, give them again the benefit of the doubt, and just chill for a second, more often than not, they do something that makes me think they suck less. Right. So I think that pays dividends, but I also understand that there are just some folks that you never jive with for whatever reason.
Sure. And I think that's fine. It doesn't have to do with courage or not courage. I think it has to do with, again, like coming back to the consideration and patience with yourself. and your process and those kind of things, what you do with those feelings, because impulsivity, I would put on the side of not courage.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And that can include, charging the bridge by yourself. It's like, that wasn't courageous. That was stupid, like whatever. Right. But impulsivity often comes out with anger, right? You pop off, you say something, you make a judgment, whatever. So that would be not courage to me. Right. And so courage in self-restraint to some extent, when you could have gotten the last word in, or you could have pointed out to everybody around how wrong that action was, right? That's if that's not going to bring the group up as a whole and raise that person, elevate that person, then there's no point in doing it, right? Because it's not going to elevate me. And what occurs to me when you said those things, though, is that all of those things can be a point of, or a component of burning out. And early on in my SCA career, I saw the old guys, they like me to call them that, right, burnt out. And then, but you couldn't take a break. You had to keep going. And part of harden the F up is you don't take a break. It's all the time, right? And now you became a pelican, you better keep working, or you became a knight, you better keep fighting, whatever. So, or the opposite, you're burnt out, but you're not yet a pelican, and people who are motivated by that, which, is a whole nother discussion, but is taking a break okay? And the courage of that, what if I'm overlooked? What if this project I care about so much falls to the wayside because I can't maintain it anymore, So there is some courage in taking care of oneself or your household or your children, whatever, your squires, and saying, you know what, we're going to take a couple of weeks off from fighter practice because you're losing your temper, and we're going to work on armor, and we're going to reset this,
Sure.
So there is some loss of face, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we worry about. And it takes courage to say, no matter what they think of me, they're going to have the patience to stick with me to understand my character.
Yeah. Yeah. We got, it's just a lot of stuff going on,
There's a lot of stuff. I know.
Courage is ridiculous. No. So I think we've done a good job of really kind of establishing why it's important that members of the chivalry have that capacity to be courageous. What advice would you give to people on the path that may be suffering from maybe a lack of courageousness, or maybe not feeling like they are able to make the best choice all the time?
The advice I have is to find the people that you think emulate the virtue that you feel you have a shortcoming in, and hang out with them and absorb it. The talking about it can, of course, be effective, but more being around people who are doing the thing that you aspire to do, that you have identified as a lack of courage. I mean, maybe somebody else has identified it. Leadership comes to mind, that you're telling your squire, your 8-foot tall squire, I know you think you became a squire for fighting, but really I want you to do some leadership stuff, And so then it's like, well, that's too hard for me. I'm too scared to do it. Okay, well then I'm going to suggest to you that you go hang out with people who are doing the thing I'm telling you would be beneficial. Hang out with the marshals. You don't got to marshal if you're too intimidated, but I want you to hang out at Marshall's Point and just be a part of it, right? And be exposed to it, and have opportunity to see people who have the virtue that you are lacking.
It sounds like really building a comfort level, familiarity.
Absolutely. And also, right, you could get 10 members of the chivalry doing the same task, and they're going to do it differently. So that's the other thing, I mean, certainly with somebody that I've agreed to directly mentor, what I tell them is, I am not good at everything, but boy, do I know a lot of people. And so, I'm going to put you with this person who effortlessly organizes or whatever.
Right.
So you can see that, because everybody does it so differently. And I think that people who struggle with courage, if they're around people who are more transparent about their struggle with courage, that is the teaching, It's not that I'm brave and I rush in. It's what do I do when I'm scared? That's what people need to see, how that everybody's afraid of something, right? And if you think you're not afraid of something, then go sing a song in court. You know, be the first one on the dance floor and everybody's looking at you, you know, whatever it is that is not comfortable for you.
Right. I like that. Yeah, that's good advice. I would say that I had the benefit of having a knight that had a similar mindset of I certainly don't know it all, but I do know a lot of people. And I think that that's I think that that is a great way to promote some more of the community aspect of what we're trying to do. I think as a mentor, coming to that conclusion and not presenting yourself as the end all be all,
Right.
is definitely
Yeah.
important and courageous in its own right.
Right, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Is that in itself demonstrates vulnerability. I remember I went to this class at Penzic, and it was from this very esteemed Laurel, who I was like, you know, I mean, I was a big fangirl of the research and patterning. And at the beginning of the class, she said, I'm going to pass around things that I've made, but I want you to know I'm not a Laurel for sewing. And people are like, oh, you're being too humble. And she's like, no, I am really terrible at sewing. I am good at patterning and research. And as her work came around, you know, we were like, wow, you're terrible at sewing, right? I mean, nobody said that out loud, but it struck me because she was so on a pedestal here. And then for her to demonstrate her vulnerability here, it didn't take this away.
No.
You know,
No.
Still, we used to call her the Queen of Persia. She still knew all things Persian, right? But she was not who was going to teach you how to sew. They were different things. And I loved that she was able to say that and to not, I mean, maybe it had been something she had overcome, but to not feel like she had to be a master at everything, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird how many of these conversations all go back to that humility discussion with Bardolph.
Miss Bardolph.
Bardolph. But
He's the humility.
well, you know, he's more humble than I am.
It was a lot of stuff. I learned a lot of stuff from that talk.
But I think that taking that self-assessment and knowing your limitations makes all of this easier. And I think that sometimes when we shy away from courageous action, it's maybe because we don't understand what we're really afraid of.
Yeah.
I think that's happened for me.
Yeah.
Because I've certainly had the opportunity to make an ass of myself because I was angry, right? I'm fueled by a passion rather than by reason. And being able to find someone, or in some cases, reflect on what I was thinking in the moment, has allowed me to really look at what the actual problem is. Well, what are you really afraid of? Are you afraid that whatever you've planned is going to be ruined, or are you afraid that people are going to criticize it?
Right. Or a fear of not being in control.
Right.
A fear of not being likable.
I mean,
you know,
exactly. Yes.
Absolutely. And they thwart people from doing what they either feel like is just and right, like they know what they think is just and right, but they avoided it, or they have yet to define what they know to be just and right. And so I agree with you that you know, I have certainly had a lack of courage in areas that I didn't understand fully why I avoided that, you know, and it in general comes down to fear, I think, of something, you know. And so once you know that you're afraid of that, then it becomes a much more a tangible thing, you know, to just bring your awareness to that as you're making decisions, you know. Self-knowledge. I mean, that's courage, asking yourself those hard questions. Why did that make me so mad?
Yeah.
You know, that's I think a courageous act.
Yes, and I think that through courage, maybe facilitating either a self-reflection or perhaps having a conversation with 2 or 3 people you're close with. I
Yeah.
think that being able to open up and maybe have a fresh perspective on it. I think that's, I
Yeah.
think that I've gotten really good personally about the self-reflection piece, especially in the last 3 or 4 years. But I'm finding now that it's super helpful to have people that I can go to, and they've been there for a long time. It's not, but I feel like I'm availing myself more of people that are willing to listen to and give me feedback on my thinking, so that I can then, go into it with almost like I've researched a little bit, and I'm not just relying on maybe
Adjust.
my unfortunate perspective to make all the decisions.
Right. And to adjust that, I mean, and there's courage in that. And I think there's wisdom in surrounding yourself by people who make those decisions. Zachariah, after every fight in any kind of tournament, a small tournament, a big one, crown tournament, he'll come sit next to you and say, "What did you see? What did you see, man?" Right. And build that into our friendship as an expectation of feedback that we give to one another. What did you see? What did you see? Right. So it's not that it's going to be some harsh criticism out of the blue. "Hey man, that did not look good." But to start with the vulnerability of, I'm asking, right?
Yeah.
And so I am known to be a person who's comfortable with that vulnerability, and I've surrounded myself with people I trust. I want to have that feedback. Ultimately, as peers become peers and stay peers forever, it is, the courage of knowing that you need to reevaluate. It's never, you're not done. And I think that we do a disservice to people that we call perfect. Put them up on a pedestal. You're the best knight, you're the best Laurel, it's just not so. Everybody's human and fallible, and it's really hard for those people. I've been friends with some of those people, and it's hard for them.
Well, it is hard on a couple of different levels. I think that what I've found as of late is that generational gaps can produce some of those some of those feelings between different groups of people. I think that I don't think we're any different than any other social group that does something like this, whatever their theme may be, science fiction, fantasy, whatever, right? And I think that nonprofit groups like ourselves are prone to having, especially if they've been around as long as we have, they're prone to having, people who liked it a certain way, or thought that this way we think about things is the best way. And I think that a lot of them will shut down to, any kind of change in what that means.
Yes. I agree. Well, that's why I bring up Zachariah, honestly, because he's young, but he's an old guy. You know what I mean? Kind of like Bardolph and Mortigan. And so there is that element of, having made it through developmentally different things, and observing that phenomenon. Yeah. Yeah.
And though I've been frustrated by it, I think many people could find many examples of when that sort of thing frustrated them. The last 6-8 months, the lockdown months, have given me a lot of pause to consider that. What is it they're afraid of that keeps them from taking the courageous step of saying, you know what, maybe you are doing this better than we did it.
Sure.
And flipping the script and saying, what is it that you fear about what they're saying that makes you closed off to it automatically? Is it really what they're saying that's aggravating you, or is it maybe how they're presenting it?
Sure.
And I think that this whole self-reflection piece has been very beneficial to me in wanting to be a better leader for the group, because whether I like it or not, and I can be honest, I really do enjoy being the Baron of everyone. It's not that I'm not here to play for just a small subset of the people that want to support me directly. There are going to be some people that think I'm not doing a great job for one reason or the other. If they don't want to come talk to me about it, there's not much I can do. But if they are willing to come talk to me about it, then maybe I should have a good attitude, whether what they have to say is positive or negative.
Sure.
Because I mean, that takes something of oneself to say, hey, I had a problem with what you're doing.
Right.
And I had enough courage to come up here and speak to you person to person and not gossip and not do the things that we've identified as potentially cowardice or certainly not courageous. Uh, I think dealing with people on the level is difficult. And because it requires you to deal with people.
Well,
The things that we identified as cowardice are all ways to avoid dealing with people.
right, exactly. And some of that's unpleasant personal habits or whatever, it's like, is that my business? One of the things that really strikes me about what you just said is perspective. And I think that when our perspective is that we are our product in the SCA, when we mesh those together, we self-identify as our service or our fighting or our art or our leadership or our role, that's when it gets into conflict.
Yeah.
Because when I think about some people who have been around a long, long time, the old guys, and their unwillingness to look at new perspectives, what they have in common when I look at it is that such an extreme identification with the thing that they started. And starting something from fresh is pretty intense,
Yeah.
It's hard not to. And it's easy for the ego to get invested in so many ways that it sneaks up on you. And all of a sudden you're an old guy and you're saying, no, that's the way Battlemore should be. Right. But you're like, well, no, we worked really hard and we had to invent the wheel. But one of the things I remember telling Bennett years ago is I think part of autocrating Battlemore is needing to reinvent the wheel. It is actually part of it, because every autocrat staff needed to do that, right? And with positive outcomes and negative outcomes, it honestly doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right?
No.
That part of, if you're going to have a volunteer organization, is to allow people to move and have some room, right? And so I've both been the beneficiary of old guy stuff. It has to be this way, Madigan. And I've seen it in myself where I'm like, no, it has to be this way. And so that's what I hear you speaking to, is gaining perspective on that. And can we yield and not yield? It's sort of like, it's going to happen to all of us. We need to bring our awareness there, and how do we have pride and ownership without that? And there is an element, I'm going to just keep bringing it back to courage, that there is an element of courage there to look in the mirror and be like, oh, I am an old guy.
Sure.
And part of being an old guy is being pretty sure about things. So I'm going to have to really keep that in check,
Well, and I think that learning to temper your passions a little bit,
mm-hmm.
and like you said, maybe separate myself from the deeds enough to understand that times change, people change. They're because it worked one way before doesn't guarantee it will work that same way again. I think these are all things that I try to keep in mind. And I think lately I've been trying to pull back in, like, well, just because it was done long ago doesn't mean it's garbage either. Listening to everything that, if we can get to a point where people are giving suggestions in a kind and respectful way,
right,
and not making it about their authority to do so, I think it would run a lot smoother.
I do too. And I mean, that's the obvious unpleasant part is, you have to do it this way because I said. You're right. I mean, that terrifically. Whereas there's an exchange. It's like, let's run a bardic your way and let's run it my way, half and half. And, and we can both benefit from that experience. That's a really, so a giving conversation on both sides. Yeah.
Yes. And I, I think there has to be a willingness to come to the table. But I don't think that that's that hard to find. I think that
well, and that's it. If who your crew is, your voice, your board of directors, your contingent is people who want to come to the table, and on the table is written, this is here we exchange open ideas with mercy and compassion, with a highlight to largesse and, vulnerability and courage. Those are the things, and we might not all agree about how you define them, but in general, come to the table with that. And then there are people who don't want to join you at the table, or they don't want to this year. And that took me a long time to realize, right? Your story, your SCA, it has its own pathway. And so where mine is meeting up with it might be, you could be in or out or bitter or friendly or whatever. And so also to just try not to have anything be a forever.
Yeah. Well, and it's something I've talked about extensively with Bardolph, is this, there was a lot established across the known world as being, the traditional way of doing things that need to be re-examined. And now we've got the perfect excuse to do it. I mean, the bottom line is that every group should be looking at, from the smallest shire all the way up to every kingdom, should be looking at what their calendar might look like now. Now that we're all on the biggest reset that we've ever encountered.
Sure.
And so I look forward to the opportunity to get feedback from a bunch of people and move forward in a way that is considerate of all those perspectives. I think that
and the courage in it is going to be trial and error, just like anything.
Yes, exactly.
Plan, you put a kingdom calendar together and it takes a nosedive the first year. The courage there is saying, okay, let's go back. Let's not stick with something that's not working.
Well, and I mean, you bring up Battlemore and like a lot of nerves with that, because, that's one of the ones where, like, God, you don't want to screw it up. And there's so many ways that it could go sideways that have nothing to do with you.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The wind could just blow for 4 days.
Yeah, and no matter what you did.
5,000 miles, and they could spend 4 days with their tent flapping on their face. And that's just awful. It's just that was just awful. Yeah.
But, I think some of the courage you're referring to exists within kind of the zeitgeist of the SCA. It's like, we do understand that extenuating circumstances are always going to be at our door in this part of the country. We live in a kind of a rough place for weather, generally speaking. So, there's a very, very few sites that just are perfect. And we do the best we can. And if the weather's the reason everything went to pot, well, we'll just have the best time we can. And then we'll do it again next year. We'll just try it different, and I think Astray is a great example of that too. How many times have the weather just was like, no, you're not going to have the time you thought you were going to.
Right. And there's all that courage within that. And sometimes what courage surfaces as is preparedness. And again, connecting to other people, and it really shows us that. And that in times of struggle, our very best selves come out. And like that is a consideration too, when faced with the lack of courage, that the rewards of efforting together towards something that is difficult, the camaraderie of fighting is unparalleled in my personal experience in all of life, is that after you've overcome some tremendous thing with, other people, that is a sharing. And the same can be said, when the day after the lily storm, what a party is that, and a good feeling and all that, even though everything's wet, So.
Well, yeah. And I've never, I think it's kind of cool that certain kingdoms have their own flavor, right? I think that that's a really interesting aspect of something disseminating across large geographic areas. And I think that one of our great defining characteristics as a kingdom is that when you are on campaign with the Outlands, God, we are a kingdom.
Yes.
Like I've seen people step up and do crazy cool stuff, whether it was just for show or whether it was like, no, this person actually affected lives here. They did the thing that needed to be done in order for everybody to be safe, that kind of thing. I've seen some courageous action, and I don't know. It's just, I think that our kingdom has a sort of good model for that sort of encouraging that sort of behavior.
Me too. Me
You
too.
know,
And I always tell people to go to Penzik, and because one of the cool things about going to Penzik is all your bros can't go. Nobody can ever afford to go all at the same time. So you become outlanders, and somebody from Fontaine is there, and somebody from Unserhofen's there, and maybe you didn't know the crown before you went. And whether there's a storm or whatever, or just the fights are so fun, right? Or the pride of dancing and drumming the crown into grand court, right? Like, and with people you hadn't been bros with, and so the overarching culture of the kingdom comes to play as outside of our little Shire barony household things. And it just feels so good. And that's, you know, I think I want to highlight that. There's part of all of the virtues that it doesn't have to be a lack of humility to enjoy the fruits of that virtue. So being courageous has enormous payoff.
oh, absolutely.
Whether it's an adrenaline dump and you're high from that, or a good outcome, or, you know, you really saved something, or did, you know, and that can feel really good that someone could have gotten hurt but for your efforts. And sometimes we go through our whole mundane life without an opportunity to have done a courageous act in the context of a social club, and have benefited from what it feels like to be a hero.
Sure.
Right? A little hero or a big hero. I mean, water bearers who are out there in the dirt and the muck with us, right?
Absolutely.
And you're like, you should be in your tent. Why are you getting your beautiful dress or whatever dirty? Right? But they share in that, and their courage of you know, and they say, I would never be anywhere else, you know?
Right. And yeah, I think it's good that you point out that there is an intrinsic value to acting in this way. That I think we definitely identified that the struggle is the risk reward assessment that we try to do at the beginning before deciding if we're going to do the thing. I think that that's where the struggle lies. But I also, and we alluded to it before, I mean, yeah, it almost always ends up better, if not way better, that the courageous act takes place.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the most common courageous acts that I see, especially now that I've been barren for a little while, is people stepping out of their comfort zone to just try something.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the biggest places where that's manifested for me has been travel, because I have taken people up on travel offers that, because I wasn't going to get there financially, maybe I needed to work for a merchant or something like that, and make that happen. And that's happened for me a couple of times. And I mean, there are people that have done that their entire SCA, and the willingness to step out of that comfort zone for, you know, the better part of a week and live a little bit different to get to try something that you wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to. Going to Penzik, the last one they had was my first, and that was a huge sort of like, I remember specifically deciding, okay, something they're doing there is worth me taking the risk of going out to Pennsylvania and doing this. And primarily the risk wasn't anything like overly negative, other than I might not have a good time because I don't know the culture, and Penzik has got, people have always given rumors about it being, you know, a little wilder and this, that, and the other. And honestly, I would recommend it to anybody now that I've been. Like, there's so much to see.
Right, exactly. But you're right, it is courageous. For some people, traveling and camping is not courageous. And for some people, the SCA is their very first camping experience, their very first road trip further than 4 hours, right?
Yeah.
And so, no, I acknowledge that, and within the context of the SCA, I mean, in my opinion, as a camper, mundanely, like, it's so structured and safe. I could go to an SCA event anywhere in the whole world and have a certain level of my expectations be met. So there is that safety. But on the other hand, if you hadn't traveled, you know, I agree. There is a courageousness of getting outside of our own box, and the SCA is all that. It's all that, right? You see this new guy and you're friends with him and you're like, no, you're going to love it. You're going to love it. And you forget the part where you're going to have to tell him that on his first day he's going to wear a dress, right? And like, Oh, I forgot to tell you that this is outside of your comfort zone, right? And we've all seen them, the cousin, the friend of our SCA buddies with their tennis shoes looking so awkward and somebody else's hand-me-down tunic, right? And a belt tied wrong, standing around. That's courage, right?
Yes.
Say, you know, and again, like what's the possible payoff versus, you know, that someone's going to mock me because I'm dressed silly or whatever, right? And so it's really looking at that. And I think in the very best, when we shine the sunny glow of the best onto the SCA, what we see is people being encouraged, having it modeled for, that people get outside of their comfort zone. We see it every day. You've never entered arts and sciences? Come with me. You never tried to Ep7 fight? Come with me. You've never thrown an axe before? Let's go, right?
Yeah.
And that we dress each other up in our costumes. You've never tried this? Try this. You've never danced? Do this, right? So we are constantly encouraging people to be outside of their comfort zone, and we're doing it because we're saying this is so fun.
Right.
Right? You will feel more connected if you do this. And to me, that's what being human is about, is, you know, feeling connected with like-minded people, having good experiences. So
yeah, exactly. So, well, we did what I wanted to do, which is we had a discussion as to what it meant to be courageous, perhaps what it means to be cowardly, how those things intermingled. Also talked about some of your experiences surrounding courage, and spoke to, you know, what is it that we can do to encourage others on the path to make those courageous decisions, act in a courageous manner. Gave some advice on that regard. So really, I just want to wrap up with giving you an opportunity to maybe tell a story. Any old story.
Any old story.
Any story that would be applicable to this situation, or just the study of virtue in general. I think that if we were going to create some sort of accounting of all the knights in the Outlands, it might be interesting to know what it is that you know, a personal experience that you have that would be of benefit to others. You know.
Well, yeah. Okay. So, you know, I was thinking about courage, and I was thinking about it as a knight and a fighter, and I was thinking about, you know, what was courageous that I had participated in. And you know, I once was in a battle at Penzig, and Arton was my champion, and I was queen, and Prothol was on my other side. It was a good day for me. And I was a junior fighter, and I don't know if I killed anybody, but the two of them killed a lot of people. And later Arton said, you know, boy, you're so courageous. You just pick the worst pockets to just the three of us run into. You're so courageous. And this is me, you know, 22. And I'm like, I got the two of you guys, like, there was no courage involved. I'm just a bad tactician. And it looked fun over there, you know. So I was thinking about that as an example of what courage kind of is not. It was sort of carefree, and it was kind of young. And then it brought me to being on Aziz's guard, and Arton was king, and we were in a battle, and I think we were all legged. Anybody who wasn't a noble was on their knees. And Arton, I guess later we found out he was saying back, back, back. But we thought he said attack, attack, attack. And so on our knees, we went forward. And then he followed us because he felt bad for it. He's like, what are they doing? The guard are like crawling out here, getting just destroyed, right? And the thing about that I wanted to highlight was that my courage, I knew we were outnumbered. I was like, attack? Like, we're going to die. But he was saying back, is that because we wanted to fight for him, yes, because we had a greater purpose, because I wasn't going to let, I think Elric was on the guard with me. You know, I wasn't going to let Elric go without me. I wasn't going to let my buddy get hurt. So my courage in the face of terrible odds and legged and whatever was bolstered by my belongingness, right? My want to be with other people, to help them, to fight with them. And so I think, courage for me has a lot to do with that, is helping others or doing what's in the best interest of someone in the face of something that's really scary to me. And in my mundane life, that's absolutely my motivation. I'm scared a lot in my mundane job, and courage is always found in the connection to other human beings and in the wanting to do that for them. So I don't know if that's what you wanted, but
No, that was fantastic. That's exactly it. Just trying to personalize the virtue a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
The last thing I was going to say is, there were definitely times when we did, myself and the sovereign, whether it was Hrothgar or Mordigan, during my reigns, things, or when Bennett and I were autocrating, when I was in a position of some authority and I had to make a considered decision that I knew people might not like and might not like me for, maybe still don't like me for. That in knowing that, to try to do what you think is best and to hope that people will give you mercy and know that you're just a human being and you're fallible and whatever. But to try to make a good decision at that time, that it's hard,
Yeah,
and everybody who's been in a position of an autocrat or a feastocrat or a king or whatever knows it's hard, and that the pressure of that. And so, those were some things that I thought of. I was like, well, that was courage in the face of knowing it would make me unlikable or criticized or something,
Yeah.
So.
I think the reason why you came to my mind for this specific virtue was because of an example that you've set for me for a long time. And not just you, but I feel like we've also had some really good discussions about virtue and chivalry and what it means to play this game with a little bit of forethought and reflection. But you and I have had many discussions on how is the best way to perform service. You've advised me in many of my undertakings, most especially when I was event steward for Battlemore. So, I think that the example that you've set for me has always been that we've got to do what's right for all those stakeholders. There's a lot of people that are coming to this event or this meeting or this practice to get something out of it. And we owe it to all of them to give our best effort and to make decisions that keep them all safe, that make decisions that don't inconvenience them, if at all possible. That considerations have to be made for the greater populace sometimes. Like, it matters where you position court so that not everybody's staring into the sun.
Yeah.
That's just a little example that I know we have in common, but that's, sometimes you might be facing down a sovereign who is really adamant about setting something up somewhere, and you've got to tell them, no, Your Majesty, you don't understand. Everybody is going to be staring into the sun. Right. And you have to get them to understand that that's not going to be good, and that we're all playing. It's not just them.
Sure. So,
I think that your wealth of experience in many ways has been passed on to me, and I have benefited from that in droves. And I wanted to talk to you about courage today because I feel like one of the ways that you have always been courageous is to speak the truth of the moment, regardless of who you're speaking to. And though that has caused me pain, I think I'm better for it. And I don't think I'm ever going to stop doing it because I've had a couple of times where it was painful.
Yeah, me too. Likewise. And telling people no, I hadn't even thought of that, but that's I've been in that position so much. And that is hard. And then, and then telling people the truth, whether they ask sometimes, a lot of times,
Yes.
and please give me an evaluation of what, and so there is courage in that of again, it comes back to that social construct of being unlikable. Hurting someone's feelings is hard because you don't want to hurt them, but also it makes you less likable, right? And at the core of us, we'd like to be invited back.
Yes.
To be offered another cup of coffee, and I think it's courageous to just know it's a process. Right? That wasn't good, and I'm going to keep going. That was really good, but I can't guarantee every conversation is going to go that way, or every king is going to allow us to move the audience out of the sun. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But so I just give you a little insight as to my thinking.
I wondered. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
But I think this has been a great conversation. It's been about 2 hours, and I appreciate your time. So with that, I'd like to say thanks for joining us again, Chivalry Yo podcast. Today's guest has been Duchess Madigan of Kandahar, and she has been kind enough to expand her thoughts on courage with us today. Hope you got something out of it. I know I certainly did, and we will be back in a couple of weeks with another guest and another topic. Till then, check out some of the social media that's going around, particularly some of the shows that are being produced by Outlanders, things like the Outlands Royal Tea, Peering at the Outlands. It's a very peer-specific and peer-edge specific chat show that is started popping up, and I think they're doing a great job with it. So if you want to get to know some of the specific peers of our kingdom and their thoughts on a myriad of topics, that would be a good one to check out. It's been good to be alive, I think, and I appreciate all of you guys hanging in there and watching the show that I'm putting out. I hope that you are well, and once again, thank you, Duchess Madigan, for joining us.
Thank you, Rowan.
We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Morty!
There was a battle in the north, and nobles there were many, and there you killed Sir Charlie Hay and laid the blame on Geordie. Oh, he has written a long letter and sent it to his lady. You must come up to Edinburgh town to see what news of Geordie. When first she looked the letter on, she was both red and rosy. She had not read a word but what when she grew pale as the lily. Go fetch to me my good grey steed, my men shall all go with me, for I shall neither eat nor drink till Edinburgh town shall see me. And she is mounted her good grey steed, the men they all went with her, and she did neither eat nor drink till Edinburgh town did see her. And first appeared the fatal block, and then the axe to head him, and Geordie coming down the stair with bands of iron upon him. Though he was chained and fettered strong, of iron and steel so heavy, oh, not to one in all the court was so fine a man as Geordie. Oh, she's down on her bended knee, I'm sure she's pale and weary. Oh, pardon, pardon, noble king, and give me back my dearie. Go tell the heading man make haste, our king replied full loudly. Oh, noble king, take all that's mine, but give me back my Geordie. The Gordons came and the Gordons ran, and they were stark and steady. Let her count out £5,000 and give her back a DB. Some gave her marks, some gave her crowns, some gave her dollars many. She's counted out £5,000 and she's gotten again a DB. She glances blithe in a Geordie's face, says, dear, I've bought thee Geordie, but the blood would have flowed up on the green before I lost my laddie. He clasped her by the middle small